This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, eat and become huge and large.
Hello everyone, welcome to Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi review show where we're putting the humanities back into science fiction. I am Gep, and I'm joined as always by my friend and co-host Dr. Izix.
Hi.
And this week, I think it's probably the best. This is the flat-out best episode of the animated series. No one can argue with me. You can at me all you want.
Well, I enjoyed it myself. I'm going to reserve judgment on which one's the best until later, but sure, we'll go with that.
Yeah, I don't see it passing this bar. I was worried. I was legitimately worried that they wouldn't be able to pull off the concept for this episode. And they proved me wrong.
Yeah. So we got some small maybe not so small this time, little fuzzy critters right here.
Yeah.
Today, this episode.
So I will admit, this episode has the flat out worst name. just full on worst name.
It's we want to make a sequel to a previous episode, but we don't know how to name it properly.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just say it's more or something. There we go.
Yeah, this episode is called More Tribbles, More Troubles, which is a direct canonical sequel to The Trouble with Tribbles.
Yes. But I think at the end of the day, though, the Troubles might be more focused on one particular side of things in this than Kirk having to sort out the Tribble situation so much himself.
The Tribbles aren't actually causing that much of a problem in this one, honestly.
Yeah, they're kind of there.
So yeah, go check out, if you are unfamiliar, this is a sequel to The Trouble with Tribbles, one of the most classic and well-remembered original series episodes. We covered that a while ago. Go check that out if you're unfamiliar with this one, because this one actually is a sequel. It has reoccurring characters and locations and ideas. It's a full-on sequel, which is pretty rare in Trek, especially this far apart.
Yes. It's like, maybe a two-parter here or there, but that's a little different, and but it's like this is a completely different series, and this is basically a follow-up, and I guess there isn't quite something like that until Discovery does Unification Part 3, but
after Next Gen and that era of TV, you got a lot more reoccurring side characters and continuations of episodes and things, and then it started moving into what we have nowadays, which is the full-on serialized television revolution, where Netflix has stolen the news somehow, and all we can talk about is which TV show we should be watching all of in one night.
I guess at the very least, this allows me to indulge my ancient interest in Flash Gordon. Like the old serials.
Yes.
They're pretty wacky.
Yeah, I have some views on serialized television that is beyond the scope of this podcast, but
at least for this episode.
Yes. For now, we're back with Tribbles. This episode was also written by David Gerald, who wrote the original Trouble with Tribbles, so it's a sequel written by the same person who did the original.
And if I recall, he even managed to get himself a cameo in this one, unlike the first one.
Yes. I forget which person, but he does do a cameo voice uncredited.
I think it was like the transporter guy that was kind of thin looking.
Yeah. And he is really fascinating. Like having seen this and read a little bit more about him and what he contributed to TNG, he didn't do a lot of writing for original series or TNG, but he submitted a ton of scripts. And a lot of his ideas for changes were incorporated into Star Trek: The Next Generation. So he's actually a pretty seminal writer as far as Star Trek goes, even though he's only credited with a few episodes.
So influential on the franchise, if only producing a few items of it.
Yeah, and we'll get into this, but I feel like having seen the original Trouble with Tribbles, which is a full-on classic, and I'm not going to argue with that, despite how much of a spoil sport I generally like to be on nostalgia. And now this, I feel like he has one of the best handles on how to work with Star Trek as a series of any of the writers in original series and a lot of the writers later.
I would also like to point out that there was a story editor on this one, as there is often, and it was also DC Fontana. So kind of the two big names there coming together.
The dream team. And we also, for once in this animated series, I think it's only the second or third time this has happened so far, we have a guest star.
Yes, besides the writer.
Yeah. We've got Stanley Adams returning as Cyrano Jones.
Yes, and Cyrano Jones spends most of the time just kind of standing there awkwardly.
Standing incredibly still.
Yes.
In exactly the same pose.
Well, he moves his arms occasionally, but
Which is
Stanley
also
Adams is here.
It's also very interesting because they have Stanley Adams reprising his role as Cyrano Jones, but Cyrano Jones is only one of two recurring characters that show up in this series, but they didn't bother getting the other voice actor in.
Yeah, because there's also this guy named Koloth who showed up previously, but they didn't actually bring his voice actor back.
Yes, Commander Koloth, who was the Klingon commander in the original Trouble with Tribbles, and not here again, voiced by James Doohan.
So, James Doohan is Scotty, Koloth, and also Korax, because he does his own voice, and then the kind of stilted upper sort of, I don't know, weird voice like this. Yes.
60s gangster Klingon.
Yes. Just kind of, how much do they pitch adjust it to make it into a different character form?
All right, we should jump in. This one's actually an interesting episode, so we might have more to talk about this time.
Holy smokes.
The Enterprise has been tasked with escorting two automated ships filled with quadrotriticale, the special grain that grows on Sherman's planet, because this planet cannot keep food to save its life.
Yes. So remember that whole treaty with the Organians, and whoever would be able to properly exploit this planet the best would be able to keep it. And apparently, the Federation kind of won that game, and they're also really bad at it. So I guess kind of goes to show how terrible the Klingons would have been.
So at the minute, the Enterprise has broken off their escort mission to investigate a Klingon ship that seems to be attacking a small unarmed scout vessel.
Come on, Klingon dudes. This is the name of your own neighborhood. You're not allowed to do that here.
Also, they may be sort of passively investigating some rumors of a new Klingon weapon that's been floating around.
Dun dun dun. Is it some sort of death beam?
Might have some death. It could be a death beam, ray, gun,
missile,
mega death ray,
rocket torpedo. There we go.
They arrive just as the scout ship is being fired upon, and the Klingons refuse to answer hails. So Kirk orders Scotty to beam the pilot aboard and prepare for battle with the Klingon ship.
So, are we anywhere near this ship and all this is going on here? Or do we need to warp over there?
They need to warp, because they always need to warp, because it's the only way they moved this ship in the original series.
So it was a warp factor 7 or 8 or something like that at some point here. And
no one knows what warp is. It's fine. Don't worry about it. The scout ship is destroyed very quickly because it doesn't have any weapons, and the Klingons they miss a lot, but they hit it eventually.
Maybe, and it's not like we're not seeing any animated evasive maneuvers because that'd be too expensive. But even still, if you just even assuming that Klingons being this bad of a shot seems weird.
So the Klingons then turn their new weapon on the Enterprise, which is a woobly beam thing that freezes all of the Enterprise higher order functions like engines, weapons, etc. They're basically dead in space.
Now, I would like to sort of point out a moment Spock has here where it's like, it's going to hit us in 4 seconds, and then like half a second later hits.
The time he finished saying it, it's like when they get into those precise things. I always wondered about that when they get into exactly 4 seconds, however many fractions of a second. Did they factor in how long it took them to say that?
Probably not.
Also, because the ship is frozen, the pilot of the scout ship is trapped in the transporter and has yet to be materialized. So he's just floating there as atoms, I guess.
Well, maybe this will give Scotty an idea for something to try later.
Koloth, who is captaining the Klingon ship, hails Kirk demanding that they turn over the pilot that they're trying to rescue, but Kirk can't do that because this is Federation space, after all. But without ship's power, there's very little that he can actually do to stop the Klingons from boarding the ship.
So the Klingons would board the ship, potentially, and then find that the guy that they're looking for is presently floated in the transporter because they froze the ship. Whoops.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like a good plan, but there you go. But just then, Uhura reports that they're losing contact with their robot grain ships, which gives Kirk an idea, and he orders them to command the grain ships to ram the Klingons.
Ramming spade!
They approach the ship at different angles so that the Klingons are forced to extend their stasis beam weapon to stop 3 ships at the same time, but this is too much of a drain on their power, and it quickly turns off, freeing the Enterprise, and the Klingons are forced to flee as they fire with very low power on one of the grain ships, disabling its engines but not destroying it.
Well, that's convenient. We're still going to have a whole bunch of grain to feed to Sharon's planet and make sure that, potentially millions of people don't starve. Hooray!
In the transporter room, Scotty can now finally get the pilot free of the transporter, which I also just want to point out in the profile, this is not important at all, but in the profile shots of Scotty working the machine, they're reusing animation from a previous episode where it was not Scotty working the transporter machine, it was a dude with a giant magnificent mustache, which you can still see in the profile shots of Scotty working the transporter. So Scotty has a magic mustache.
You can only see it at certain angles.
It's only there if you believe it's there. So Scotty gets the guy to materialize just as Kirk and McCoy arrive to see Cyrano Jones and his bevy of pet tribbles.
I think this is a good point to, remind everyone of that one moment from Portal 2 where GLaDOS says, "Oh, it's you."
Except Kirk doesn't say, "Oh, it's you." He has the weirdest, most stilted line reading in the entire episode.
Yes.
He goes, "I think I know that man."
Yes, he's our guest star. Recurring character for this episode.
So Jones, who previously caused problems when he bought Tribbles onto a space station filled with exactly the same grain and, all that stuff from the last episode, now claims that the Tribbles are perfectly safe because he has genetically modified them to prevent them from reproducing.
Oh, well, that's kind of a nice thing then. They're not going to fill up the entire ship with their spawn. Hooray!
Kirk is still perplexed at seeing Jones here because he was supposed to be stuck back on the space station cleaning up Tribbles, but Jones was able to finish that very quickly because he found a natural predator of the Tribbles called a glommer, something like that. Yeah, it's a multi-legged creature that appears to feed on Tribbles and has eye stalk things.
It's a real alien gizmo there. I like it.
Kirk wants to know what Jones did to tick off the Klingons so badly, but he is just not talking, so we're going to deal with that later.
We got Klingons to worry about. Let's start learning more about the Klingons then.
There is an entire scene of McCoy examining the Tribbles where the only line he says is, It's hilarious because it just goes on for a bit too long. It's just,
Yeah, it is. This is an episode where a lot of stuff, happens, but there's still moments like this where it's clearly just kind of we need some extra material here to fill in.
Yeah, and it's just weird. This is such a weird mix of intentionally hilarious because there's a bunch of decent jokes in this episode,
yes,
and unintentionally hilarious because the animation is so bad.
Yes.
Later, McCoy does confirm that these Tribbles do not reproduce; they just grow, so nothing to worry about. Just, the new weapon transporting the grain and how everyone on this planet is starving.
Yeah, so we already got enough problems. These Tribbles are just going to be a side distraction for the time being. Got it.
They move all the grain stores from the now disabled ship to the Enterprise, which fills the entire ship, including corridors, with grain containers.
Well, I hope these grain containers remain nice and shut because there seems to be Tribbles getting everywhere.
Yep, and they continue on to Sherman's planet as the Tribbles do, move around the ship and sniff out the grain and stuff. Early on, they said, contain these Tribbles. And then he said, no, they're safe. And I guess they're like, oh, okay, we don't let them wander around then.
Now, couldn't we at least seal them in a room, maybe?
Do literally anything to keep them from just wandering around everywhere?
Yeah, I recall a line from the first episode of Red Dwarf where the character Dave Lister has a cat, and that's no good because they're on a spaceship, and he's getting in trouble for it and getting basically a big talking to, and it's like, what if it gets into Holly? Suddenly, just nibbles something cable here, and we're suddenly flying backwards. Don't you have any concern about that in on the Enterprise here?
Maybe the Tribbles just don't nibble cables.
Sure. Well, you can get in a plasma duct and clog it up, right?
That's true. So the Klingon ship returns. This time they disable the grain ship, with a few shots and then shoot at the Enterprise a little bit, maybe because their new weapon hasn't recharged. But they do manage to knock over some grain barrels, letting the Tribbles at them. And also now the Enterprise has to tow the damaged grain ship in addition to carrying all the cargo, leaving them very open to attack.
We are at a strategic disadvantage here.
Kirk confronts Jones again, who is claiming that the new Tribbles are harmless despite the massive one that keeps taking over Kirk's chair.
Yes, and throughout the episode it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, this is just the best running joke. He keeps pushing a Tribble off his chair, and every time it's twice as big as it was the last time. It's just great. Before they can get very far into interrogating Jones, the Klingons return again. This time, they do have their stasis beam thing, and they trap the Enterprise.
Oh no!
They again demand they hand over Jones, but Kirk, much to his deep regret and shame, recognizes that Jones is a Federation citizen and so is under his protection.
Yeah, I'd actually like to get him off my hands here, but I kind of need to follow the rules here. Sorry.
So Koloth is now ready to board the Enterprise and takes Jones by force.
Oh no.
But as the Klingons prepare, Kirk orders Emergency Defense Plan B, and when the Klingons open the doors to, I presume, their transporter room, they meet a bunch of Tribbles.
Whoops. So apparently Plan B was to send the Tribbles over to them. Did we do this last time?
Yes, we did. Kirk demands Koloth release the Enterprise just as a huge Tribble rolls around behind him on the Klingon bridge. Koloth, however, cannot relent because Jones took their genetically engineered Tribble predator and they need it back to take care of an ecological disaster that Jones has started by selling Tribbles to one of their planets.
So you're not actually looking for Jones, just the critter.
Yep.
Why didn't you say so, Koloth? Come on.
Because the Klingons, I guess. Kirk agrees to this and sends the Glimmer back despite Jones' protests. McCoy has also made a discovery that the super large Tribbles are not actually super large Tribbles, but colonies of a lot of Tribbles.
So instead of a bunch of Tribbles that are just sort of splitting apart and things like that, they just kind of get pregnant and then have more inside them or something.
Yeah. So on the Klingon ship, Koloth brings the Glommer to the engine room, which was great. One of his crewmen comes and says, "The engine room is filled with Tribble."
With Tribble.
They open the door to find one massive Tribble, and the Glommer runs away.
Uh-oh. I don't think the Glommer's going to be much help here.
Koloth orders the Tribble shot, which breaks up the colony into 1,000,000 small Tribbles, burying him immediately.
Oh no!
On the Enterprise, McCoy has a better solution, a drug that will slow the Tribbles' metabolic rate, breaking up the colonies and making them actually safe pets.
No, that's kind of nice.
He injects a few and they break up, including one that Kirk is standing directly underneath, which breaks up and buries him in Tribbles. Again.
Again.
One day I'll learn.
Never be underneath a potential source of Tribbles. I'll have to remember that for next time.
So this episode was just hilarious. I feel like this is the thing. People need to understand that Star Trek is inherently ridiculous and just lean in.
Yeah, there are ways to attempt that and to do it wrong, but this one does it very well.
It does. All of the best Star Trek episodes recognize their own inherent ridiculousness.
Yes.
And they are in some way funny, even if they're dealing with a pretty serious subject, which this one's not. But even if they're dealing with a pretty serious subject, most of them are at least a little bit funny because they recognize that dealing with a serious subject in a ship run by magic space rocks is ridiculous.
And so you can get away with, poking a little fun at yourself and making good use of the totality of the collection of tropes you're using here in order to make something that's quite entertaining.
And, I just don't think I've seen better demonstrations of that than David Gerrold's writing when he's not interfered with. Because he also did the original script for Cloudminders, but then it was rewritten to change his ending, which was supposed to be kind of a downer, into there's a magic gas that's making everyone fight.
It's a MacGuffin that we surprise everyone with at the last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this one also had a MacGuffin, but it doesn't matter because, the Tribbles aren't high emotional stakes. The fact that they can fix the Tribbles in the last 2 minutes of the show doesn't really matter at this point because we don't care that they needed to fix the Tribbles. It's not really narratively important.
it's more of a sideshow to the main action. Heck, even with the the business with trying to get grain to the planet, they some of the grain gets eaten by the Tribbles, but not all of it. In fact, there's a whole second ship out there with plenty of it on there, and so the people are not going to starve. Maybe they're not going to get as much as they wanted or needed, but they are going to have at least something.
And it's not like the earlier episode where maybe they were going to eat all the grain and then they discover that it was poisoned.
Wait, spoilers.
And then one of the Tribbles is going to explode for later spoilers.
Yes. Bomb Tribbles. I do need to point out that the Tribbles appear pink in this episode, unlike the sort of browns of the previous encounter. And there's a very good reason for that.
Is it because it's difficult to animate darker colors?
Not quite. It's has something to do with Hal Sutherland being colorblind. So that's also part of the reason the Klingon episode, outfits are more like purplish and things like that. It's like, it looks right to him, so go with that.
That's excellent. That's amazing.
So the Tribbles are like little pink fluffy balls in this one here, and that was not intentional. That actually intended them to be some sort of shade of gray.
I like pink Tribbles. I mean, it's probably just a side effect of their genetic manipulation that makes them pink.
Yeah, sure. In universe, I'll go with that explanation. Also, I think they're kind of adorable like this too.
So, this episode doesn't deal with a lot of morality or difficult decision making. It's basically a funny episode where we bother Klingons with Tribbles, but it stumbles onto a few interesting things that actually have very modern parallels with how we deal with invasive species.
Indeed.
Which, in fact, the Tribbles are demonstrated to be a very classic invasive species trope, where removed from their natural environment, where presumably there would be some sort of natural predator or other influence that would necessitate incredibly fast breeding. Removed from that, the incredibly fast breeding becomes a problem where they immediately overwhelm their environment instead of having a natural counterbalancing with either a predator or a dangerous environment that would cause most of the Tribble babies to die before they became an issue. So, first thing, we can talk about genetic engineering, because that is something that's being tried possibly right now to try to deal with troublesome invasive species, namely mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes. But aren't they, according to, I think, Lilo and Stitch, the endangered?
So, a lot of mosquitoes are native. We have some invasive and traded around mosquitoes. It's really difficult to tell where mosquitoes are coming from. They're also moving further north as global warming comes in. So where they used to be way more prevalent in southern swampy areas, at least in the northern North America, now they're moving more and more north as we get global warming, changing the local environment. So they're becoming a bigger and bigger problem. And despite mosquitoes being annoying to deal with, they also are a very key component in spreading a lot of diseases. So dealing with the overabundant mosquito population is really on everyone's minds at the minute.
But there are ways to sort of combat them. And, people have been trying various forms of, dealing with their breeding pools or, gassing them or whatever for years and years now. But, I have heard a little bit about this genetic engineering stuff, but you're probably more up on the research right now.
Yeah, most of the other things have problems. People are probably familiar with DDT. That was an original way that they were trying to deal with mosquito populations way back in the 50s. But spraying poison on everything gets poison on everything.
Yep. So hope you guys like having poison all over your face.
Had a significant impact on bird populations. As a side effect, they had to outlaw it because it was basically decimating all local bird populations.
So we don't have anything that flies anymore.
Yeah, and the birds were eating the mosquitoes, which causes a bigger issue later. So a current theory, this is mostly a theory, they haven't been able to test it on a large scale because of significant political pushback and some slow processes there. But a current theory is that a way to deal with the mosquito problem that might not introduce such a random amount of danger into the environment is to introduce genetically engineered mosquitoes, namely sterile male mosquitoes.
So they'll go around, get busy, but not have no babies.
Yes, they will introducing a large number of sterile males into the population, or possibly, I don't know if this is going to be tried, but ones that would introduce sterility to later generations. I think right now the plan is to just release a massive amount of genetically engineered sterile mosquitoes, and then they would outcompete a significant number of non-sterile mosquitoes and hopefully lower the general population because so many fewer mosquitoes would be able to breed.
So you'd have potentially in the short term a increase in mosquito, the total mosquito population, but a large fraction of that would be the sterile ones. And then, it's like, well, there's not going to be much of a next generation. So once this generation dies off, the next, generation is going to be greatly reduced.
Also, introducing sterile males means that you're not increasing the disease risk because only female mosquitoes drink blood and therefore spread disease.
So it's like, well, there's a lot more bugs around, but they're not ones that are hurting us. Hooray!
So the general concern here is that somehow introducing this new genetic component into a population could have unforeseen consequences, which we won't know until we test. Now, this one should, I say should because, again, we need to test this more, be almost inconsequential because the genetic change makes them sterile, which makes it impossible for them to pass on their genetic changes. But again, until we see more wide-scale testing, you can't be sure what the outcomes will be, which is where some of the pushback is coming from, because in order to test this, they want to release a large number of these sterile mosquitoes into a more isolated island population that hopefully wouldn't spread too much, but basically use that island population as a testing ground. But the people who live there are a little uncomfortable with being used as a scientific testing ground.
You want to be fully sure that it's going to be safe, and that your whole life might just not get turned upside down due to science gone amok or something.
Yeah, which legitimate concerns. Some people seem a little bit overly scared of just the term genetic engineering because we're in that kind of age at the minute. But yeah, I can see people's point in going, why do you get to use our local environment to test your thing that you haven't tested anywhere else?
Yeah. It's like, well, can you just pick another random island here, please? Why us?
It's pretty interesting to see that even, this was written 40 or so years before they came up with any of these ideas. That's exactly the same ecological containment strategy that Cyrano Jones came up with for the tribble population.
Well, he attempted.
Yeah. There was the idea, he just didn't do it very well.
So it's kind of interesting, how stuff from the animated series of Star Trek is still predicting stuff that we're trying now. So that's kind of cool.
Now, there's another thing that they tried in this episode that actually was tried earlier than this several times, but one of the biggest failures in this was in the 1930s. This is just invasive species, like all the way down.
Yes.
But Australia brought in sugarcane to farm in Australia because sugarcane is a pretty valuable crop that can grow well in parts of Australia. The sugarcane got invaded by an invasive beetle called the cane beetle, which was feeding on the sugarcane crops.
Whoops. Oh no, our sugarcane.
In order to deal with the cane beetle, which is the invasive beetle eating your invasive plants, they brought in a cane toad, which is an invasive predator, a large poisonous toad that is a natural predator of cane beetles.
So I'm suddenly reminded of that I guess, nursery rhyme song thing about I knew an old lady who swallowed a fly. She thought she'd die. And then she starts swallowing everything else in order to go after the fly. So this
seems like a good idea, right? Like, you have an invasive animal that's not native and it doesn't have any natural predators, so bring in a natural predator. Makes sense. Like, in this episode, they brought in what they supposed was a natural tribble predator, but apparently it was a genetically engineered tribble predator, as we learned later. The problem is, the cane toad, now in a new environment, discovered there was easier food. It never actually ate any of the cane beetles. The cane beetles, as far as I'm aware, are still an issue.
Yep.
And proceeded to eat all of the other native insects.
It's like, they've never seen something like me. Mwahaha! I shall gorge myself and reproduce, and suddenly there's frogs everywhere.
Yep. And in addition, cane toads are incredibly poisonous. Their eggs are poisonous, their tadpoles are poisonous, the toads themselves are poisonous, so they don't have any natural predators.
There's probably not going to be anyone locally who decides to go after them either.
So in Australia, currently, there was an introduced population in the 1930s of about 3,000 cane toads. Estimates in Australia today put the number at several million.
Whoops. Yeah. So don't do that, folks. I also did a little bit of research on this sort of thing myself, and on not so far away from Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, New Zealand has a lot of introduced predator issues.
Yes. So I think it was back in the 1800s, they were having an issue with rabbits, which are also an invasive species. And they were, mucking up the fields, and suddenly it's like, all our sheep are not able to, that we've also imported, are not able to, eat as much grass because it's being eaten by all these freaking rabbits, man. And so they're like, well, get something to eat the rabbits. I know, let's get some stoats in here. And so stoats, if you're not aware, are these long boys. They're kind of like ferrets and weasels. They're kind of that same family there. And they're also really, really hungry, and they like to breed a lot. And so suddenly, over the next few decades, the rabbit population crashed, but there are still rabbits around, of course. But so did the population of all the native birds. Good number of which, are unique to New Zealand. And so you had, suddenly, these large populations of native animals that were going from doing all right to suddenly near extinction or even extinct. And so, people, are familiar with the kiwi, right? Well, there's not many of them left, really, because of these little guys here going around and eating their young, their eggs.
What's particularly interesting with New Zealand, they are so proud of their very unique natural habitat, which has a lot of terrestrial bird species, because New Zealand did not have native terrestrial mammals before humans brought them to the island, which means they had a lot of the same ecological niches for small terrestrial mammals being filled by terrestrial birds, like the kiwi, the kakapo, other now very endangered bird species.
And so humans show up, bring in their stoats, their rabbits, their deer, their goats, their everything else, their rats, their mice.
Cats, rats, and airplanes.
Yes. Apparently horses are also on the list of, invasive, dangerous animals for the environment locally. And it just screwed everything up. And suddenly the entire environmental balance was kind of out of whack. And so they are very eager to get about fixing that. And so there's actually this massive campaign in New Zealand called Predator Free 2050, which is to make all of New Zealand predator free by 2050. And so they have, putting a lot of money into this, a lot of, public awareness stuff, and even offering up, assistance on like setting up traps in like your neighborhood or your backyard. So you can, capture critters that are going around and killing all the birds. And
this is actually having some great strides. They've gotten a couple of their islands to be completely rat-free, which is something that was unheard of until recently. They're doing it. So you can deal with these problems. It just takes a lot of time, effort, and money.
Yes, and so, the short-sightedness of the previous generations is being corrected slowly but surely, and I wish them much luck.
So that leads into another kind of interesting thing, though. I will just say, since I know a lot about New Zealand birds because it's something I find really interesting, the introduced sheep population that they brought into the New Zealand mountains has now become food for the local kias, which are one of the only alpine parrots, which are an incredibly intelligent, fairly large parrot, and they eat meat because they're omnivores, but because they live at cold alpine areas, they will eat fat and meat, and they will sit on the back of sheep and eat the back fat off of sheep, which sounds awful, but you shouldn't bring sheep into parrot area.
Yes.
So the parrots actually started eating the sheep.
It's kind of impressive, I have to say.
They also dismantle cars.
So be careful with your car in certain parts of New Zealand.
Yeah, these parrots will just dismantle anything you bring in there. Sheep, cars, buildings. French fries.
This is our land here. Go away. Otherwise, we'll
Yeah.
rip you apart.
Basically, yeah. So that goes into, I've got two more interesting things with invasive species here, and one of them kind of goes into this interesting question that is like, it goes into things with like New Zealand having a weirdly unique habitat, same with Australia and other places. And it was something that some scientists started becoming interested in more recently, and there hasn't been a ton of research in here, but there's a couple of interesting theories as to why do certain species become invasive and other ones don't. So what we started looking at here is there are a lot of introduced species in North America from Asia, because parts of Eastern Asia and a lot of North America share a very similar ecosystem. So plants and animals from parts of Asia can live very well in parts of North America. We do not see very many invasive species going the other direction. There aren't a lot of invasive North American plants and animals in Asia. Even though you might expect that all of the trade and globalization things that are happening, you would possibly expect that the invasive species would just be spreading everywhere. But in a lot of places, it seems to only go one direction.
So why is that? Why is this environment here, which is very similar, not really working out for these new critters who are coming in?
Now, again, this is only early theories, but from having looked at places where waterways were connected by either man-made or semi-natural canal systems, they've developed a bit of a theory that it has to do with sort of kind of the age of, but a bit more of the amount of biodiversity in an ecosystem. So when two bodies of water are connected by a canal, animals and plants and other things in those two bodies of water can go either direction through the canal. When you connect up two bodies of water that have a very similar amount of biodiversity, you do see this kind of cross-pollination where each body of water winds up with invasive species from the other. But when you connect an area of high biodiversity with an area of low biodiversity, it tends to flow from the area of high biodiversity to the area of low biodiversity.
So you sort of have more options as far as figuring out what niches to take over, just because there's more options of critters on the one side.
So the kind of current theory is that areas of slightly lower biodiversity have had less time to evolve and propagate and fill all the niches and develop the same kinds of like balances and possibly even sort of, to use like a lack of a better term, is kind of a like ecological defense system as an area with higher biological diversity that would have been around longer. The current theory, again, strong quotes on theory, for why we're getting more invasive species into North America than out of North America is because for a significant portion of the last ice age, most of North America was covered in glaciers, which limited the amounts of animals and plants that could live here, which is not the same for those similar parts of Asia.
Yeah, the glaciers of North America were like coming down to like Missouri or something like that.
Yes.
To the greatest extent. Well, in Asia, it's like, yeah, we're kind of mostly north of China, so yeah.
So the general idea is that the biodiversity in Asia has just simply had more time to evolve than the biodiversity in North America.
That kind of makes sense. But again, this is still early research, so so something that makes sense could still have a big, well, also this other thing pop up later.
Yes, it's just a currently working theory. It seems to make sense. There's very limited ways to test it, but
what if we could create a whole planet where we could test these things and just sort of do whatever? That would be kind of horrible, wouldn't it?
Sim Earth?
Yes. It's an awesome game.
Okay, finally, I have a final thing, and this is a bit of an ethical conundrum that I've got for you.
Is it right to destroy all of a species in a geographical area?
Close. Are you at all familiar with a species of plant called a water wheel?
No, I don't think so. The name sounds familiar, but I have no idea anything about it.
So a water wheel is a carnivorous aquatic plant. It's sort of a free-floating vine-looking thing, and it lives in waterways and feeds on small crustaceans, tiny fish, microscopic animals, that sort of thing. It's native to parts of Eastern Asia. 90% of its habitat in Eastern Asia is now gone. This is an incredibly endangered plant species. In the 1970s, it was introduced to parts of North America. Intentionally, like plant hobbyists started growing it in North America as just a hobby, like people who collect carnivorous plants. One guy noted that it was incredibly endangered in its native range, and he started seeding it around the American Northeast, where he noticed that it grew fairly well in outdoor ponds in like people's backyard collections. So he started seeding it in what he thought were isolated areas around New York and New Jersey. It took off and is now an invasive plant species.
Whoops.
But it's also super endangered in its native range. So do you treat it here like an invasive species where it may or may not be threatening local plants and wildlife? We just don't have enough data to know. But if you kill it off here, then it goes back to being an incredibly endangered species worldwide because it is basically extinct in its native habitat.
Indeed. Yeah, so it can't really go home again.
But it can't stay here.
So, once again, let's make that planet somewhere.
So you wind up with a weird ethical dilemma. If you want to protect native species, possibly, again, we don't know if this is causing significant ecological damage yet. But if we wait to find out, it will have caused significant ecological damage.
So is there, we've already kind of demonstrated that there's not a good way to sort of isolate it because attempts to do that have already failed.
Yeah, this was initially seeded in what were presumed to be cut-off areas of water, like old quarries and isolated ponds and wetlands, but it spreads. So do you try to kill it off here, even though it's basically extinct, or do you let it grow here, knowing that it might possibly have a negative impact on local wildlife, but could save an endangered species?
Some part of me suggests that maybe there's like some sort of between both options here that you could basically actively contain it to a certain degree for the long haul and see how the local environment adapts to it. Alternatively, go, hey, China, could you restore some wetlands over here, please?
Yeah, ideally, they could do more conservation in its native range and then you wouldn't wind up with this problem. But we have no control over that in North America.
That kind of sucks.
So, right now, we're almost forced to wait and see because it would be such a massive effort to clean this stuff out of waterways.
Mm-hmm.
But it is just an interesting dilemma. You have a very, very similar dilemma. They weren't intentionally introduced in the same way, but pythons in Florida are almost extinct in their native range, but they are a nuisance animal in Florida. There are bounties for hunting the things.
Yes. My sister lives in southern Florida, and she's, alligators and pythons are kind of the thing she's worried about eating her pets.
Mm-hmm. But pythons in Southeast Asia are almost extinct.
So, do we let them hang out here, or do we get rid of all of them then?
Yeah. So do you kill off an endangered species to prevent it from causing local species from becoming threatened or endangered?
I think that's an ethical dilemma that I have to think about a lot more personally. But our listeners are, feel free to give us your insights on this. I know we don't do much tell us what you think about stuff, but I'm kind of curious, actually.
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting one. So if you are interested, we have comments open on the YouTube. And if you join our Discord server, we would be happy to have some discussions with you.
Because this is one of the ones that I kind of don't know what the right answer would be.
And in this one, I don't think there is a right answer. There might be a least bad answer. I don't know what that is, but there's probably not a right answer.
Yeah, other than the fanciful ones I came up with.
Yeah, we should colonize Mars with water wheels and pythons.
Just fill the entire area. It'll be great.
It's the planet of the endangered species. Don't go there. The giant Martian pythons will get you.
Oh, that reminds me of that one bit from Dice Funk there. Except that was Tarrasques.
Actually, that's like, that is 100% a plot line. Like the endangered species that are super dangerous to everything else is just 100% a plot line in Buzz Lightyear Star Command, the old cartoon. There's a planet they go to that is filled with endangered species that are just giant tentacle bug monsters that are trying to eat you.
It's the only place we can let them live. Also, don't go there because they'll eat you.
Yeah. I thought they were referencing that when they did it in that Dice Funk episode. Just like, people should listen to Dice Funk. We reference it too often on this show.
Good stuff.
Well, that's all that I had. I had a lot of notes on invasive species, but the Tribbles are only sort of invasive species, so it sort of ties in.
And I think your ethical question was more potent than mine, so I think we're good on that front, too.
It's your ethical question, should you throw fuzzy things at Klingons?
Maybe. or at least bother them with Tribbles, you know?
Bother.
So I think I'm about good to go as far as my stuff goes.
Okay, then. It's probably time for the galaxy's favorite game show!
Hey everybody, welcome back to the game show portion of the show, where we got a whole bunch of contestants and they seem to be multiplying quickly. So let's count up the points and try to get some of this sorted out, sooner rather than later. So our first prize is the Cosmic Muppet Prize, which goes to the Tribbles, now in super sizes. What do they win, Gupwin?
The Tribbles need their own spin-off movie series. The Great Tribble Caper, The Tribbles Take Manhattan, Tribble Pirate Island, Tribble Christmas Carol.
I would highly enjoy some of that. Maybe not everything, but some of that, yes. Oh! Our second prize is the Terrible Economics Prize, which goes to, once again, to Cyrano Jones, because he's still trying to peddle a highly defective product to people who really don't want it. What does he win, Gepwin?
Cyrano Jones, I don't know how economics is supposed to work here. He's a con man grifter in a post-capitalist society, which confuses me. So I think he just gets school. He should go to school and learn that he doesn't need to work anymore because you're in a post-scarcity society.
So, like, chill out, Mr. Jones. Maybe that's why he's going to bother the Klingons. It's like, the Federation people won't buy my crap. I'll go sell it to them, even though they hate me, because they'll buy stuff. Anyway, our third prize is the Tragedy of Errors Prize, which goes to Koloth and to a lesser degree the Enterprise crew for not communicating sensibly or figuring out the real reasons for why the Klingons are pissed here. So what do they win, Gepwin?
Koloth and Kirk get an intro to communications class at any community college, because this was literally an assignment in my Communications 101 class where you both get like a paper and you have to discuss who gets fruit for an ecological disaster, and you learn that one of you needs the fruit juice and one of you needs the fruit skin, so it's really not a problem if you just talk to each other.
So even basic negotiation tactics could be useful here. Isn't Kirk supposed to be some sort of diplomat as well?
I don't know. I don't know what Kirk is supposed to be.
He's the captain of the Starship Enterprise. But he doesn't win our last award today. The one that we're doing sort of new here is the Let's Forget This Ever Happened prize, which goes also to Koloth, because this was just so embarrassing for him. He goes up against Kirk, and later is like, yeah, I never went up against Kirk. Nope. When does he win, Gepwood?
I don't know what to call it for Klingon society, but he wins a, like, nice quiet retirement somewhere. It's like, he needs to just go hide. And I guess he does forget about this, because when he shows up later in DS9, he does not mention Tribbles.
Yes. So, he's put this behind him, so far behind him, it might as well not exist, because it was just that out of his league here, or something. Or covered in warm, fuzzy critters. Anyway, Gepwin, I'm running out of steam here. Take us away.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and thank you all for being here for the galaxy's favorite game show!
So stoats are pretty crazy, you know?
Yeah, they're like weasels with teeth.
Yeah.
Weasels have teeth, but
And they're like, they nibble everything and they like reproduce real fast. So they're like tribbles that eat things.
that's the long tribble. It's like a long Furby.
Yeah.
It's the long tribble. Oh my god, we can do this. Tube snakes.
Tube snakes. Two boys.
The long tribble. I had a stuffed tribble. I had a tribble that was a stuffed tribble that made noise when you squeezed it. It came with a 2-pack of Trouble with Tribbles and Trials and Tribulations on VHS.
Nice. That's fantastic.
They did not include More Trouble, More Tribbles. I'm disappointed.
So, because you could have had this wonderful episode as well.
Yeah. I could have learned that there was an animated series.
Yes. Would have been aware of it existing. Hooray.
Okay, next episode I've never heard of, called The Survivor. Quote, not to be confused with The Survivors, Star Trek The Next Generation.
Yes. I'm a little familiar with this one, but not as far as like most of the plot details, so.
Yeah, let's see. It is the 6th episode of the first season. Thank you, Wikipedia. I would never have guessed.
And we also have an uncredited guest actor, voice actor, too.
Ooh, uncredited.
Yes.
Okay, we've got Romulans, we've got Sulu, Neutral Zone, alien species that can transform its shape at will. Why is everyone so impressed by this when Odo does it? This is like the 9th time we've run into shape-changing aliens.
Well, it's because he can be kind of anything, while most other aliens have to be some sort of person.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's not like Wesley's girlfriend in Next Gen. She was a weird ball of light or something.
Is that the one that also could become like a weird monster Ewok thing?
Yeah.
I don't remember the ball of light bit, but it's been a while since I've seen that episode.
It's not a great episode, but...
It's the dolphin?
Yeah, I think so.
I believe is a reference to France. France! Anyway, France is not the next episode here, probably.
No. I don't know what this is. There's some sort of shape changer, does something to the crew or not, or empathizes with them too much. This is nonsensical to me. I try to skim these to see if I can get a general idea without spoiling everything, and I just can't make heads or tails of what's happening in this plot.
I do remember that there's lots of tentacles.
Oh, well, that's fun. Tentacles. The Enterprise is attacked by a tentacle
Monster.
Fine.
Whoops.
Sure, Night of the Tentacle.
Yeah, remember all the times in the original series where they couldn't do the Eldritch Horrors? Well, now we can, so hooray!
Oh, that's fun. Okay, we'll figure out what in the world is going on with this episode next time on Watchers of Tomorrow.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, more troubles, more tentacles! You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.